happens oftentimes is that there's a passage that we are relatively familiar with, and because we feel like we're super familiar with it, maybe a little more than we are justifiably feeling, we read it kind of quickly to get to the parts where we think I can go by this part because it's not that interesting, to get quicker to the part that I know is coming up, because I've heard this preached on, I've read it, I know what's coming up, and that's where my attention should go. Well, sometimes by doing that, you just blow past something that if you had thought a little bit harder, kind of upstream, you would have said, oh, well, in view of that changes how I view what comes next. And makes it sound a little differently now than perhaps it would have been otherwise. So Anyway, that's the thing. So we have the reading this particular Sunday. It's the gospel lection from Matthew, and it is from Matthew 15, and it's going to be the story of the Canaanite woman. And I alluded to that earlier in the front half, but just the setup for it is that Jesus has, in the beginning part of 15, a confrontation. I guess that's the right way to look at it. It's a confrontation between him and the Pharisees, where you say, well, okay, that happens like seemingly every other page. That's not that interesting. Well, in this case, it is a little interesting, because in this case, the Pharisees and the scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem. So these aren't the local scribes and Pharisees. They made a special trip to see him. So this is like, and they even look like they're spoiling for a confrontation, because, the first thing they want to do is they want to ask this question that's really, as much as anything, kind of a accusation. Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? Why do your disciples, meaning we actually got to, your disciples are doing it, but you're letting them do it, that you're the one they're taking their cues from. And well, then there's this back and forth. He talks about them, he calls them hypocrites. And then there's a discussion when he talks more about the people. He talks to the people about what actually defiles a person. Anyway, I don't know whether the significance of them being from Jerusalem is as much as I'm making it out to be, but it sure seems like they're a delegation sent from the capital to him, and they don't seem like they have any other thing that they're doing other than they are confronting him. They're being openly hostile. And so then it's not a surprise after that. It says, well, we start in story for Sunday in verse 21, and Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. So he's putting some distance, and he figures that Tyre and Sidon, that they're not going to track him down there, and he doesn't need this nonsense. So I'm not saying that he's running away from them, but I am saying that he is withdrawing geographically, having just had this confrontation that seems like maybe there's something more going on in that confrontation than the run-of-the-mill way that he runs up against the Pharisees in other places in the scripture. Okay, I don't know. In any case, he does leave, and he's going to this area that is outside of the normal boundaries of the Jewish nation, right? Because it's like this is going to kind of like going to a foreign country, or at least cities that are on the border with a foreign country. And so, why don't you pick it up at verse 22 and go just read 22 at the moment now through 24.
Through 24?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I expected it a little longer. That's fine. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." And he answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel."
Right. Okay. So he's been entreated now by this woman. She's a foreigner. Well, he's in her country, so he's the foreigner in this context. But she's not Jewish. That's the whole point.
Mhm.
I think it's Luke's gospel that uses a different term, um, calling her a Syrophoenician woman, and it doesn't mean that there is really one is identifying her more by her geographical home, and the other one is a other description. Canaanite is describing more an ethnic background. One or the other, I can't remember which way it is, but the idea is that they're consistent. They're not really saying anything different, and so but she's got a problem. She came from that region. She evidently hears about Jesus because even though he's kind of withdrawn to this district and probably you might think of him as, laying low, or at least, he's not trying to drum up business, that's for sure. But she knows or hears about him being there, and she's got a problem, and she believes that he could be the solution to her problem. Because, of course, the problem is that her daughter is being oppressed by a demon. And since she believes that he is able to command the demons based on past history and the stories that are going around about him, then she can, well, maybe she can get him to interfere or intercede rather in her case, in her daughter's case. So I think it's interesting. When she came out, it says she was crying. So think of that as crying. I kind of like uh, imagine as hollering, right? We talk about people
Mhm.
hollering this and hollering that, but what she does is she says, "Have mercy on me, O Lord." So she calls him Lord. And then what's the other thing that she addresses him by? Not just Lord, but also,
Specifically, son of David.
which is a messianic title.
Yeah.
She is identifying him kind of in an open setting as the Lord, the Son of David. This is suggesting that if she's heard that this could be the Messiah and she believes it. At least she's addressing him that way. So she's addressing him with faith that he is the Messiah. And then she tells him the problem about the daughter and what depression is going on, and what does Jesus in verse 23, in verse 23, what does Jesus do to her request? How does he respond to her request?
In 23,
In verse 23.
well, he doesn't. I mean, the disciples say to him, send her
He
away.
doesn't. No, he
Yeah.
doesn't. That's the whole point, is that he doesn't say, "I'm not going to do anything for you." He just doesn't say anything really, other than evidently he notes that she's there. I mean, he can acknowledge her, but he's not saying any word to her one way or the other about what he's going to do, right?
Right.
All right, so he doesn't answer her a word, and his disciples came, so they're also there on the scene, and begged him. They're asking Jesus, "Hey, send her away, get rid of her." For why? What's their problem?
No, she's crying out. She just keeps following him around, crying out to them.
That's right. So she's making a major kind of we call it a fuss, but it's more than that. It's like she is actually getting kind of on their nerves a little bit, that they don't need this, and besides that, they don't have, what do you think that their view of a Canaanite woman is going to be, as far as how much social standing
Right.
in polite Jewish society she
Well,
would have?
well, on top of that, I mean, if they're walking around in Canaan or in that area,
Yeah.
and they're Jews, and she's drawing attention to them,
Well, yeah, okay, good.
right? So, yeah,
The point is
that's,
that she's not going away quietly, is she?
but she's not.
She is not. In fact,
Right.
she keeps ratcheting it up, and And he does eventually answer. He says, he says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So that sounds kind of, well, one way of hearing that is to hear, I have a ministry, but it is exclusively to the house of Israel. So, and you're not part of the house of Israel. So, why are you asking me? You could hear it that way. But, but I notice that he doesn't actually say that. He's saying what he's saying is perfectly true. He was sent, and he was sent to the house of Israel, and not really sent to evangelize or do preaching in all kinds of other places, in that part of the world. He's sticking to the Jewish people. That's true. He still hasn't said whether he's going to do anything for her or not. He can be, both of those things can be true. He can be saying correctly, I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, and also be thinking in his mind, I can do something for you, or at least in your case, your daughter. So it's the one doesn't mean that the other, that he has no interest in the situation at all. So you might think, well, okay, again, you're reading past this, and that sounds like that's kind of a dismissal. So okay, Jesus is not inclined to want to help her. That's what a person might come away thinking. But does that, okay, given that he says that to her, does that finally get rid of her?
No.
No. So why don't you keep reading and start at verse 25, and let's go ahead and read the rest of it, because it ends through verse 28. So
Yeah. Okay. So beginning at 25, but she came and knelt before him, saying, Lord, help me. And he answered, it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. And she said, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. And then Jesus answered her, O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly.
all right. So, and this is the part where Jesus responds to her, entreating her again. She's already made a request before, but now she's going to come right up to them in public. She's going to kneel before him, and she's going to ask him again to please help, right? Lord, help me. And that's when he answers. And people who have read this, and sometimes people who have preached on it, have thought about the response Jesus gives right then about the children's bread, and it not being right to take it, and obviously take it from the children and give it to the dogs, the pets. So that's that people have heard that and thought that's kind of a callous response,
Yeah, especially
right?
considering that Gentiles are sometimes referred to as dogs.
Exactly. And it
Right.
seems like there's a bit of a, what we would call a racial slur there. I don't think they would have thought of it then. I mean, people people talk to each other all kinds of ways, and mostly you just had to keep going. So you didn't get bogged down in, what did you call me? Nobody does that back in the ancient world.
Well,
So,
especially considering it seems to be okay to refer to people who deserve it that you're a brood of vipers.
well,
So,
especially she's not going to object to what she's being called, because she still needs his help,
right.
right? She's got a vested interest in saying, I'm going to let that, you get a pass on that. We're not even going to address that. But here's my issue. And she puts it squarely before him. Okay. So, and people have speculated about, why does he do this? Why does he call her this? Because he seems to be in essence likening her, probably along with other people in that community, in that status, dogs. Jews would be seen as, well, they're like humans, they're like children, they're people.
Hmm.
But these others, all, is the suggestion is that you're kind of lower than what even a lowly Jew would be. You're like, you're kind of on the level of a dog, as far at least as how much consideration we're going to give you. And that sounds pretty harsh. And people have tried to do all kinds with this of things with this. They've tried to soften it. They've said, well, the word there, dog, they and this there may even be some truth to this, but it's kind of irrelevant. Is that they'll say, the word that's actually being used there, they had more than one word they could have used in the Greek, and this is the one that means like a little dog, like maybe a family pet, something that's going to be loved by the yeah, you Scruffy, we just love that little
Oh,
Scruffy.
you don't have a little dog. Well,
Egg.
the better way to do, like,
I don't really think that makes it so much better. Um,
well, I don't think
than
it makes it better either. But I think
but
if you were going to
but
make a case,
people think, well, yeah, so you're at least acknowledging the family pet is kind of a member of the family, and so at least you feed the dogs, right? You don't just let them starve and go find their own food. So people are saying, well, this is like a cared for dog, but he's still in the sentence he gives. It's not right. That's a statement. It would not be fitting to take something intended for the children. In this case, the metaphor is the bread, and give the bread, the good things, to the dogs. So that there's no way of getting around that this is likening her to being her and her daughter for that matter to kind of like being dogs. Why would why would you take the children's bread and give it to the animals? See, and as much as commentators dance around this and they try to soften it or make it not as harsh, not as I don't know what else to call it. Racial profiling is what comes to mind, but that's not really applicable in that day either. He's definitely recognizing her non-Jewishness. So, she's and then we're going to get to her answer in just a moment, but you remember what the disciples before we get to the disciples, let's just say this is that you wonder, why did Jesus answer that way? Is it just to like make it clear to her, no, you're asking me to do something that wouldn't be fitting. I'd be giving something good to people that are not Jewish, and I'm only sent to Jewish people, or something like that. It is, no matter what you do with it, it's sort of a peculiar situation, and you'd wonder what's Jesus up to. In fact, that's sort of the clue. You start you start reading enough of the Gospels, and you always start asking questions when something is really unusual. Okay, what's Jesus really up to here? See, I think that it is supposed to be a comment intended to sound insulting, and sometimes people will say, well, this is just to see if she can pass the test of faith, that she has enough humility to accept an insult, and enough humility to hear this, and but recognize that her own dignity is not as important as getting her daughter helped. And so, does she have enough faith to stay there, kind of like, in this case, it's not stand her ground, it's kneel before him and beg, in spite of all that he's saying to her. And so that's how people will also try and put it, is they'll try and say, well, this is a severe test of her character and her faith, uh, whether she's going to tolerate being talked to that way or not. I agree that there's a test going on. I just think that you got the wrong party in your sights when you think that she's being tested. Okay, here's why. Is that, remember when Jesus was first approached? She's making her request very vocally known, and he's not saying anything. He's not saying, "Oh yeah, we can work that out." And he's not saying no. He's just not saying. But who is doing the talking besides the woman when Jesus isn't talking?
the disciples
The disciples.
send her away.
send her away. So, if anything, did they learn a thing about seeing people with compassion, or seeing this as a salvation for some, with at least worldwide implications? If they did, it certainly hasn't been reflected in how they're looking at her. They're looking down their noses at her, and they see her as nothing but a nuisance and a bother. And my goodness gracious, she's hollering and crying out. We don't need her around, so get rid of her. Okay, well, that's how they're looking at it. And she keeps persisting. And then Jesus came back with this, you will just call it the insulting comeback, because I don't think there's a good way of getting around the insulting sting, but throwing it to the dogs. And it doesn't say, now I gotta infer something that it doesn't tell us in the text. But if the disciples are still there to hear it, and I think they are, then, what are they probably doing? Well, they're probably laughing, high fiving. Good one, Jesus. That's the way to tell
Yeah,
her.
you
Put
got
her in
him.
her place.
You
Right?
got her, right?
You got her. You,
Right.
you, you own that gal. That's, so they are probably, in my mind, they are agreeing not only with what Jesus said, factually, but they're also agreeing with that attitude that they think he's displaying. That she's not somebody that we, that certainly don't bend over backwards to try and help. And yet, what does she say? She does still have faith. She says, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs," right? The crumbs fall from the master's table. The children aren't going to get down on the floor and eat them up. So the dogs might as well have some good things from the table as well. And that's when Jesus says, "Oh, woman, how great is your faith?" I mean, I think that he's been feeling this for a while, but this just nails it. And at that point, it says, he said that says he's going to be done as you desire, and her daughter was healed instantly. So, do I think that there's a test going on? Actually, I do, but I think he was testing his disciples to see what their reaction would be to, here's a real person in need, and we have the opportunity to minister to her. Are we going to see this as a good thing, as a part of God's kingdom, and the expansion of this kingdom? Or are we going to do the predictably Pharisaical Jewish thing and turn in on ourselves and say, you're not our problem? And that's exactly, see, I think the disciples failed this test terribly, because I think that they could have observed, based on Jesus' past behavior, how he deals with some other people.
Yeah, I was going to say he's done this before.
He's things,
Yeah.
not exactly the same thing, but he's dealt with people, like the centurion. Okay,
Right.
centurions are not going to be favored people. Now,
Right.
granted, that's happening I think it's happening in Galilee, but so it's not outside of the borders, but it's not for somebody with, most favored nation status, that's for sure. So he's done things like this before. He's had compassion. He cares about when people need help, and he is there to bring help and power and salvation, if you can use the term broadly, from God. I mean, this is what his ministry is about. And it doesn't, yes, he was sent to a specific people in a specific place at a specific time. But if the disciples were picking up on anything, if they were, they'd realize, that we should have a different attitude toward, like for instance, the 10 lepers that called to Jesus at a distance. They called him, Lord, have mercy. And then, okay, well, they're lepers, for goodness sake. Those are outcasts. And yet Jesus sees that even though that they are outcasts, he is going to do that for them. He's going to send them to the priest, and they're going to be healed along the way. Apparently, the disciples aren't picking up on this as a theme. We just do this for people because it's the right thing to do. And no, send her away. Oh, why do we care about her? She's making a fuss.
Yeah, she's making a fuss. Now,
I think this is a test that they failed.
yeah. Now, don't forget, I remember one time you and I were talking about, and I think you may have even said this in a sermon, and it says, and when this was over, in verse 29, it says, Jesus went on from there and walked beside the Sea of Galilee.
Okay.
It's almost as though he specifically went there to meet this woman.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing. He withdrew to that area, but it doesn't say that he met with anybody else or did anything else while he was there.
Right.
He only has this one encounter with this one woman. And now, like you say, it's kind of almost like that was the real reason he went there.
Thanks for listening to Radical Grace Radio today, and may God bless you.